Hello everyone and welcome to the .NET Core podcast, the only podcast which is devoted to .NET Core, ASP.NET Core, EF Core, Signaler, and not forgetting the .NET Core community itself. I am your host, Jamie Caprogman-Taylor, and this is episode 33, .NET Core 3.0, MSIX, and the Windows Store with James Moontemagno. In this episode, I interviewed James about his work dogfooding most of the technologies that we've all used, from Xamarin to .NET Core. We also talked about releasing apps using preview bits, MSIX, and the Windows Store. Some of you may know James from his work at Xamarin, at Microsoft, or from one of his podcasts, Merge Conflict and Nintendo Dispatch. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and let the show begin. Thank you ever so much for being on the show, James. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and chat with me today, because obviously, we're all really busy, and, you've got 1,200,000 podcasts or something.
That's a pretty accurate number, I would say. Yeah, roughly. And they seem to grow once a week or so.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. And I can totally understand. Yeah, I don't know how professional you are. I mean, not yet anyway, how professional you are when you're recording, but you certainly sound incredibly professional when it's edited together. And I can't even imagine how long it takes to get that sort of feel for the show. So editing all of those podcasts must take forever.
Yeah, it's strange. When I got started podcasting probably a decade ago or so, I really toyed around with it and never really took it super serious. And then when Frank and I started doing Merge Conflict, I guess almost 3 years ago now, I had just started working at Microsoft, or just about to get started to work at Microsoft through the acquisition of Xamarin. And I knew that with all the travel that I did and all of the development and all the program management I had and all the things basically I had to do, that there was going to be no way that I could sit down for hours to edit a podcast. Additionally, I'm sure it's like you're aware, like there's a lot of things that go into podcast production. And if you want to pay somebody to edit a podcast, that costs a lot of money. And overall, I mean, it's not crazy amounts of money, but it's money. And when you record 52 shows, even if that's $100 an episode, that's $5,000. Like, it's just really expensive. And I don't have $5,000 sitting around to do podcast editing. So I told Frank, I said, there's a few different ways that we can record this podcast, because I've been on ones that take, 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 hours to edit. I said, if we're going to do this podcast, I know in the beginning it'll be rough, but we're going to do live to tape. And live to tape just means when we record it, if it's in the recording, it's in the podcast. Like, my mentality is, how do I spend the same amount of time that we recorded it on editing? So if we do a podcast that's 40 minutes, that episode will take me 40 minutes from start to finish, including uploading, show notes, everything. So that's sort of how I've done it. And so normally what you hear on the podcast is actually what we recorded in real time, with very minimal. I mean, there's very minimal tweaks and tunes every once in a while, but after 156 episodes with the same person, that's the key, right? It's hard with guests, and I'm sure you're aware because you have guests on all the time. That's the hard part, is guests and multiple people. But when you're doing it with the same person for 150 episodes, it's sort of like clockwork.
Yeah, I can totally imagine. That you get into sort of like a flow, and roughly what the other person's going to talk about before you talk about it.
Yeah, you kind of start to get their cadence a little bit, and they get your cadence, and it's something that ends up becoming very natural. And there's a few other podcasts I do where it takes a little bit more time. Just every person's a little bit different overall, but we're starting to do some live streaming now too, and that's gone very well. And when you see the person, you can really tell when they've finished talking and when you can kind of take over and things like that. So it's quite enjoyable. I still love doing it after three years and so many episodes. So it's why I got started podcasting. I know this isn't the topic that you asked me to come on, but I really did it because especially after moving to Seattle, there's this thing called the Seattle freeze, where just people stop talking to people, and we're all kind of in our own little igloo and just our own little bubble, especially when it gets cold. And a lot of my friends live in Arizona and New York, and even Frank, he lives 2 miles away from me, and I'll never see him, like hardly ever. Not that we don't like seeing people, just like we just naturally stay indoors to ourselves or with our own, significant other. So why I do the podcast, half the reason is, of course, that I love doing it and talking about the technology, but it's also like 2 hours that I get to talk to one of my best friends in the entire world and get to catch up more than anything. So it's that nice, enjoyable part of the week that it's like me hopping on a phone call and talking to my parents for an hour. So I kind of get that same joy out of it.
Yeah, that's cool. I totally appreciate that. I know that a large percentage of my friends live miles away from me, and if I could do the same thing, I would. But I don't think we can recreate the feeling of going down to the pub, having loads of drinks, eating lots of food, and then falling home in audio format.
It's very, I mean, you could. It would not be probably one of the best podcast productions ever, but yeah, it's definitely not the same. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, thanks for that at the top. Some top advice for budding podcasters, I guess.
Yeah, for sure.
Excellent. So I guess we're a couple of minutes in already, and unless people have looked at the title of the episode, they may not know who I'm actually talking to. So I was wondering, could you give us a brief introduction so that the listeners know sort of who you are, the work you do, that kind of thing?
Sure. Yeah. And I love when podcasts open and you don't even know the other person, or like I like to start presentations that I do, and I'll not even mention my name like through the entirety of it, because I'm just a person. You just came to hear me talk, right? I'm just a voice. But no, I'm James Moontemagno. So I'm a principal program manager over at Microsoft, and I overlook all of our mobile tools in the Xamarin space. So what that means is a few things. My focus is on community initiatives first and foremost, and an oversight on the product. So I work with a lot of the different development teams that are working on SDKs, tooling, same with our program managers that are interacting with our customers, and me also with our community members that are running user groups, doing events, go out and I present at conferences, do workshops all around Xamarin. So mobile development with C# for iOS and Android. And I'm a longtime Microsoft developer, so I not only when we talk about Xamarin, we talk about all the other things you can build with .NET. So WinForms, WPF, ASP.NET, Mac applications, server applications, things like that. And I came to Microsoft through working at Xamarin, where I was a developer advocate focused on technology. I was there for 3.5 years. I've now been at Microsoft for 3 years. And before that, I was a customer of Xamarin. So I kind of moved to Seattle 8 years ago, went to go work at a startup building all their mobile apps with Xamarin, went to Xamarin, now at Microsoft, and now I'm here. Just hearing
that trajectory, I mean, you started, essentially you've dog-fooded the product that you're helping to innovate, I guess.
Yeah, the reason I wanted to work at Xamarin, because I've been, like I said, a long-time .NET developer, and I used to work at Canon working at printer software. That was my first job out of college, which I loved. I did that for 4 years. It was all .NET. I got to do a lot of WinForms, but I got to move into WPF, Silverlight, WCF services, more advanced scenarios. And then I found mobile, and I fell in love, and I got lucky that the startup I worked for out in Seattle, right after I left Canon, let me pick whatever technology I wanted. I really fell in love with Xamarin because it's like I was a C# developer, a .NET developer, and now I can build mobile apps for the Android phone in my pocket, which I thought was so cool. And yeah, I really fell in love with the product so much that when the opportunity came up, I got lucky. Just a recruiter randomly, I don't know if they read a blog or I'd emailed them or something like that at some time, had reached out to me, and it was sort of this just dream opportunity to go and not necessarily go work on the product that I love, but still use the product and help other people be successful with the product. So it was like combining all those passions all in one type of job, while still being able to, if I wanted to, contribute to the product, because it's open source and you can kind of do whatever you want. So
I do know from obviously preparing for these kinds of interviews, I'll look into guests' kind of online presence and what they're about and some of their projects that they've worked on. And I have to say that looking at some of your projects, it looks like you've used a lot of new technologies just as they've been sort of coming to the forefront? I mean, you mentioned there that you got to use Xamarin and stay in that sort of .NET C# space pretty early on to create these apps for your mobile devices. I've seen that you've produced a couple of, I think it's 1 or 2 Xbox 360 games, and most recently, I think you've been working on something with .NET Core Preview 3 and releasing it to the store as well, which is interesting. This preview level stuff. Let's just get it out there and show people how to use it and get it out in the store. That's interesting to me.
Yeah, I guess I got really lucky going into mobile as early as I did 8-9 years ago. I started mobile development with the very first Windows phone, so phone 7, and that really took off. And then I obviously spiraled into iOS and Android and did all the Windows stuff along the way. I guess maybe mobile trained me to always be on the forefront. Frank and I, we always joke, we have like literally the same podcast every year, which is around May, June timeframe, which is when Google I/O and WWDC come out, Google and Apple's developer conferences, and Build too is in there too. So it's all 3 of them. As we call it the beta summers, because you need to spend the entire summer updating all of your machines to the beta OSs, to the beta versions of Visual Studio and Xcode and Xamarin and Android Studio and all these things, and update and prep your application to be on the latest. So you're always sort of having to keep up with the platform as things are grinding away, because our phones are just updating all the time. So you have to stay on there. And coming to Microsoft, we have a really great internal sort of dog fooding. It's not a policy, but it's highly encouraged, right, to dog food. And by dog fooding, I mean just you're testing your own product that you're building while in development. And for a long time, that was really hard for me because I couldn't dog food a lot of the products because I was out there presenting the product. So it's really hard for me to be using internal bits that aren't maybe 120% stable because, I need to present it, and often I can't show those features. So what I do a lot in the advocacy space is attempt to stay up to date with whatever's happening. But as soon as there's a public preview of anything available, I want to take advantage of it. And I just want to go to town and really try to give that early feedback from the user's perspective, because as you're getting hands on the bits and starting to give feedback, I want to be there too, to go through the same things that the developers that are using our products go through. And I think that's a theme that I see with all of our development teams and all of our PM teams at Microsoft are really actively involved in not only building the product, but using the product from the customer perspective, if you will. So I've been recently heavily working in and around .NET Core 3. And of course, very excited about .NET 5 as go into 2020. But to me, I started as a desktop developer and I moved on to mobile development, but always still had a strong passion for doing a lot of things on the desktop. And when I got into streaming, often I found that there was kind of a lack of desktop tools, or there were desktop tools to help streamers. Like I do live code streaming on Twitch. There was sort of a lack of desktop tools, or there was very complex things. So as a developer, you go and you try to find things that will help you. You're like, I need this countdown thing, or I need this music thing or whatnot. And they either exist or they don't exist. And if they exist, they're probably not exactly what you want. So then you go and develop it yourself. And you're like, this is what I'm going to make. And I started to develop a new application for the desktop. And I said, I'm going to use WPF and I'm going to use .NET Core 3 and I'm going to try to ship it to the store. And I did. And it was a journey, I would say.
That's amazing. Because like you were saying, you yourself are then dogfooding that entire process. Not just I'm building an app, but also I'm pushing it to the store and let's see what the experience is like with pushing it to the store. And then I can give feedback, I guess, both in a wildly public whilst on your stream and a slightly more private nature. I mean, I'm presuming there'll be things that you will say to your colleagues in a one-to-one or in an email or something that you may not say on a live stream, but you're able to give that feedback. And I guess with the live stream nature, you can actually point your colleagues who work on those applications and frameworks and tools and stuff at the video and say, actually, if you skip to 25 minutes in, you'll see the actual problem that I have, and you'll be able to recreate it. I guess that's probably one of the greatest ways to log a bug report, I guess. Actually go watch me recreate the bug.
Yeah, it's very true. And the entire program management team has really gotten into, and the development team too, have gotten really into the live streaming process for a lot of that reason. One, it's a lot of fun and great to interact with the amazing community around .NET. But David Ortnow, for instance, who's one of our program managers for all his like Xamarin SDKs, he does a great job because he has community guests on all the time. And you really realize really fast that every developer is very different in the tools they use, their setup they use, the packages they use, and you get to see how people use the IDE, how they use the tool, and you get to sort of live their struggles. Sometimes there's no struggle. Everything's super gravy and it's all great, but sometimes you see those struggles and yeah, you get immediately that feedback. You can ask them questions. And then at the same time, you're learning a lot. The community is learning a lot. And you also get to highlight the awesome community members. So it's been a lot of fun to learn those examples. And often I'll get developers, like if I'm doing ASP.NET Core work, often I'll see ASP.NET team members in the Twitch stream and they want to see, right? Because it's, when you're doing it, it's almost free, like research in a way, of being able to say, come watch me. And, I'm not an expert in this field, but I am I know .NET and I'm going to go and try to do this. And what's been cool about that process is like not only being able to give that feedback to the team, but when I see something wrong, like as I'm going through it, like in the documentation, I just do the pull request live and like, I just get the feedback out there as soon as possible. So it's quite enjoyable.
I can imagine that it is. And I can imagine it's, I know that, so I haven't, full disclosure, I haven't watched your stream yet, but I have seen Jeff Fritz, his streams, and they are amazing just to sort of, sometimes he'll sit and he'll say, right, okay, friends, we're going to learn to do this today. Or sometimes he'll say, hey, look, so here I am building this thing. And look, these are the Git commands that I'm going to issue to actually do the pull requests and to do all of this. Or maybe he'll sit and look through issues, and things like that. And it's amazing to see that coming out of, such a big company that has such high standards, knowing that there is this ultimately free resource to learn all of these techniques, being able to watch a stream with yourself or hopefully if I do one that's as good or Jeff or anyone who's doing these live streams and being able to go, that's how I do a pull request, and then being able to interact directly and go, oh hey, I don't quite get what this is about, can you just explain it? And then having yourself or Jeff or whoever just sort of stop for a moment and go, right, okay, now we're going to talk about this because someone has asked in the chat and I'm going to talk you through it. So it's kind of like a group tutorial, I guess. I don't know whether you had those back at your college where you could all sit together and you'd all sort of learn something together.
Yeah, when I was in college, we kind of had that. I mean, it was a little bit different. I mean, definitely not as interactive, right? It's almost like live pair programming. We have this team that Jeff helped curate together on Twitch. It's called Live Coders. You can go to livecoders.dev. And there's this team. Right now it's about 61 different live streamers that do development, not necessarily all .NET development. Like Brian Clark right now is streaming like Node.js and JavaScript, and later today I'll do some Xamarin work. But there's all sorts of different types of development in that space on there, so you can go in and you can learn. It's this nice little community of learning. And even yesterday, I was kind of bored, and I was in one of my colleagues, Kim Philpott's streams, and he was working on some stuff, and I'm chatting to him like, live in the Twitch stream. And I'm like, oh, I would do it this way, right? I would do it this way. And I'm like, you know what? Just send me a Visual Studio live share link and I'll just hop on a Slack call really quick and I'll just do it with you live. Like, it was crazy. And it was fun to see the chat room. Like, whoa, like now all of a sudden James is like pair programming via this live stream and interacting with the chat room. And these are things like these technologies didn't exist, before. So it's this really crazy, different interactive learning where like I just hopped on Kim's stream randomly and taught him something that I think that's the fun of it is getting people together and doing that paired programming, even though Kim lives in Australia, and I'm over here in Seattle, and it's his morning and my night, and you could just hop in and do this stuff. It's quite a joy.
It is amazing. And like you say, when you pair it with things like Visual Studio Live Share, where you can just jump into someone else's session and sort of move the character around and make changes. And then I believe you can hit F5 and set up a SSH tunnel between the machines and send the debug symbols down and like breakpoint it on the remote machine whilst running it on your machine. It's magic. It's wizardry is what it is.
It truly is, yeah. It's pretty crazy.
Have you heard about Rider, a cross-platform .NET IDE developed by JetBrains and based on IntelliJ Platform and ReSharper? If not, it's time to give it a try. Develop .NET, ASP.NET, .NET Core, Xamarin, or Unity applications on Windows, Mac, and Linux. Get Rider today at rideride.net and try it for free for 30 days. That's rideride.net. I was just wondering if we could talk a little bit about .NET Core 3 then, the previews that you've been playing with, and maybe some of the features that your most favorite features that you've been playing with that are coming to .NET Core 3 that may not have been in .NET Core 2?
Yeah, so, let me set up the scenario here because it's probably what people actually came to listen about, not me streaming and podcasting, but it all goes together because the stream is the reason I did this, right? So let me paint a picture. There's a program that everyone uses to stream. It's called OBS, Open Broadcast Software. And there's different flavors of it, but it's a very complex, amazing application. And when people start a stream, you'll start sending a stream out to Twitch or to YouTube or Mixer, but it takes, a few minutes to propagate that stream, not only to the servers, but out to any of your notifications to subscribers. And what most streamers do is they'll start their stream and they have a countdown timer or some sort of starting soon. And there are tons of countdown timers that are out there, but nothing was in the store. Nothing was super elegant or beautiful, and nothing did exactly what I wanted it to do. I wanted to integrate it into my entire setup process. So when I go live, I press a button and it does like 20 things. It launches the software, it starts the stream, it does the tweets, it starts my music, it does everything for me. So I wanted to be able to use that in my application. So I wanted, command line arguments to pass into my application so I could boot it from anywhere. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to do that via like a website or things like that because I wanted it to be shared. I didn't want to have a server. So I'm already on the desktop. So a desktop application makes sense to me. So I had a few thoughts going into this. One, I could, create a UWP app or maybe a UWP app with Xamarin Forms as our UI layer if I wanted to. So I could go to like Mac or something like that or another platform. And then I thought, I want this to be general purpose. So I want this to run on Windows 7 and Windows 8. That was my goal because I know there's probably some streamers. I've already had requests come in to support older operating systems, although everyone should just run Windows 10 and then everything would work a lot easier for developers, I guess. But, and then, so I said, I'm going to build a WPF app because I haven't built a WPF app in a long time. And I was like, I'm just gonna go to town. I've done a lot of WPF, and I know there's a great ecosystem out there of UI toolkits. Like I used Ma Apps, which gave me a great look and feel to the application. So I wanted to have some tabs that you could count up, you could count down, you could have a giveaway, you could add minutes. And the whole concept of the app is that while the countdown is happening, it says, starting in, and it counts down every second, and that writes that information to disk. So just to a text file. And then OBS, you can have a label that reads from the text and updates, and it has a file watcher, basically. And whenever that file changes, it will reload that into your UI. And then when the countdown's done, you display a message. So there's like some things in there. And again, you could launch this via some sort of URL. So WPF sort of made sense for me at the time. I was like, I can redistribute this. I can just give someone an exe and boom, good to go. And just like most developers do, like I just started and I said, I'll just, use the latest and greatest technology, and why not use .NET Core 3 because I know that somehow in the future I could distribute this to Windows 7 and 8 because that's what they told me I could do. That's what the vision was coming out with this new sort of bundling software called MSIX. And when I first started, I didn't even think about MSIX. I first started, I just didn't even know I'll just package it up and, use something like, an exe that you download from the internet, which is bad, right? Here's an random exe. And then I said, how do you do updates, right? I'm like, oh man, how do you do updates? And everyone's like, oh, just use Squirrel. And I was like, oh, I'm going to have like a server. It's going to get complicated overall. I don't want to do exes. I don't want to manage updates. These are the things that you forget about when you first start doing development. You're like, oh, how do I deliver updates to people? So the cool part is I watched this video on Channel 9 and on YouTube. I forget, it was like on one of the .NET shows that we have on MSIX, which is this new sort of app packaging format for Windows. And the whole idea of it is to give the very common sort of packaging AppX format that UWP apps have to deliver to the store for any Win32 WPF or WinForms apps. And that will be available via .NET Core 3. So with .NET Core 3, you can either package with MSIX or you don't have to. You can just like publish to a folder like you would always do in WPF or WinForms days. But then you don't have an update process there at all. Like you're just delivering, exes. But the cool thing with MSIX is that it works with any application, and I believe regardless if it's .NET Core 3 or not, but you can have it create an entire website for you that does automatic updates and will deliver either every time the user launches the application or when it like nightly or whatever, it just shows up inside of your desktop app inside of it. And you can also at the same time distribute it to the store. So I'm thinking like, all right, there's no way I'm going to do my own update server. I'm not going to deliver to a folder and have to create a website. I want this thing to be as easy for people to get. So Microsoft Store, that makes so much sense. Automatic updates, I love that. And the cool part here is that when you use this MSIX, at least on Windows 10, you get special Windows 10 features like being able to launch your application via URI, which is really cool. So you sort of start to get some of the Windows 10 specific features inside of your application when you're bundling the app up into this. So that's a very long explanation of why I did it, what technologies I use, and then how and why, what I got out of it, I guess. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. I do like that you took the route of which tools can I use to make my whole release process more productive, right? Because as developers, we provide productivity to other people. We develop tools, we develop software, we develop websites, we develop apps, games, whatever it is that allow people to be more productive. So why spend all of your time, like you were saying, why build a server and figure out how to do auto updates on my software when there is, something out there that a rather large corporation that has probably thought about it a lot more than I could. I'm speaking for myself here, who are, collectively are a lot more intelligent than I am, who have already figured this out. They've already solved this problem. So why not just leverage that? And then in the future, maybe if I want to move it from the store and put it somewhere else or invent my own, I can. But for now, it gets it into the hands of people, I think it was I keep saying this, I've said this on a lot of podcast episodes so far. There's a quote in the Phoenix project that says that until the product you are working on is in the hands of the people who will use it, it's not generating any value. And obviously you can put value in bunny quotes there and have your own definition for value. But until somebody is using it, there's no value to it.
Yeah.
From a purely, this thing that I'm creating will give someone joy, will give someone productivity, will give someone something. Well, it's not giving them that thing until they get it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think that for me, it was a great learning experience because I got to really sort of dog food the product early, but I also got to look at the implications of it. Like I already know that if I was to build, this application with standard WPF, and not use .NET Core 3, I know that my application itself wouldn't be able to take advantage of all of the performance improvements that come with .NET Core 3. So there's, I actually have like side by side of running and loading applications and doing file access. Scott Hunter did this demo where you would, it was a WinForms app, or maybe it was WPF, add a folder, and it would look at all of the subdirectories, all of the things, and do a little pie chart of, what was taking the most size. And he ran, and we created that, he created that sample. So when he would run it, you could run it with standard framework and then .NET Core 3, but it's the same code, right? Same UI, same code. And just the file IO performance, the performance of the app itself was like 4x faster. So he would be able to parse the file system instead of in 5 seconds, in 1 second, and that's huge without doing any work. So for me, I wasn't necessarily like, I'm going to get tons of new APIs and new crazy things with .NET Core 3. For me, it was, I'm going to get performance. I'm going to get the ability, at least that I know that there's a roadmap that I can take this easily to have it, this upgrade cycle, and at the same time support older operating systems if I need to. So to me, that was cool just to see in general, and then learn through how do you actually take this thing that you developed, package it up, and get it into the store, and what are the implications there? So like when you do go through this process, you get some of those cool niceties, like I said, but also your app becomes sandbox. So some of the APIs that you were using now maybe put files in different places, or you don't have access to certain areas, or things like that. So that's one implication that sort of comes with it. But it's something that totally works and worked for me.
I think I know the demo that you referenced there. I'm sure it was one of the very first. Hey, look, we're bringing Windows Forms and WPF to .NET Core on Windows only, and I'm sure at least the version that I saw was both Scott Hunter and Scott Hanselman on stage, and Hanselman's doing his thing of telling loads of jokes and being really entertaining, and Hunter is standing there going, "Look, this is this. Look at this. We can run this, 4 or 5 times faster. Just look at this." And Hanselman's telling all sorts of jokes and being really silly, but that's not to detract from either of them. They both do a brilliant job at what they do. I just, that's my memory of it, and that may not be 100% what actually happened. But what I really like about that is that, I guess, with the speed increases that .NET Core 3 brings, I guess if you wanted to, because I alluded to it a little bit there earlier on, and I feel like I need to bring it back up again now. But it's just that Windows Forms and WPF are supported in .NET Core 3 if you are on a Windows platform. At least that's my understanding of it. And
yep.
And I like the idea that if you were to use maybe solid principles and separate out your user interface correctly, correctly is maybe not the correct term there, but do you know what I mean? So sort of don't have the user interface driven and tightly coupled to the code behind it. You could potentially swap the user interface and maybe release the same or similar code for one of the many Linuxes or for macOS. Just swap that user interface out for something else. You'd have to maybe think about the Windows Store, I guess, but that's that same code, isn't it? Just running on a different UI.
Yeah, and that's how I developed this application, funnily enough, is I sort of thought about where I could potentially take this application. So I structured it in a MVVM type of way, XAML user interface, data bindings. I had a few interactions with the UI, and the operating system. So I had the ability to access like the clipboard and to open URLs so I could launch the browser. And beyond that, most of the other things I were doing was like, here's a standard input, output, countdown, writing to disk. And those are all things that are available in .NET standard libraries. So the core application, what's fun is that I could have written the entirety of it inside of normal WPF, and I could have converted it over to .NET Core probably in 20 minutes. I bet it would have been super fast. And I believe I actually started with normal WPF and then transferred it over to .NET Core 3, and it took like 5 minutes, 10 minutes to do. And at that time, the reason why I had started or created a shim framework project is I just wanted to edit the user interface inside of a designer where they didn't have a designer, and now they do for it. And it's all new because the designer is now running on .NET Core. So that's pretty impressive in itself, and I believe out of process. So that's really cool. And yeah, I thought the cool part here is that I think of it how I think of Xamarin applications too. And I just think of .NET applications, which is that you just have these head projects, right? And this head project is your WinForms app, your WPF app, your ASP.NET app, your Xamarin iOS app or Android app. And this is where just either your UI may live there, it may be using a cross-platform UI, but it sort of just gives you the access to the core APIs. So for instance, that clipboard and opening browsers, like those are Windows APIs. If I want to go do that on Mac or I want to go do it on iOS, I have to use iOS and Mac APIs to do that. Maybe use some helper libraries, things like that. But in general, the cool part here is I was able to first start with the WPF app. I had it running on .NET Core 3. I went through this packaging process. So the MSIX is the packaging process that allowed me to put it into the store. Now, the cool part here, and what I really want to talk about, is that I didn't have to put it in the store. I could have generated a website. In fact, I have a website. It's mystreamtimer.azurewebsites.net. You can download the app from there. So it generates you a whole website. It does automatic updates automatically, and you can install it. The difference, though, is that you need a certificate. When you put it in an app store, it's signed for the app store that can allow to be installed everywhere. So in the scenario of you want to self-deploy and install it magically, like you need to have a DigiCert basically. And I didn't want to pay for a DigiCert. So I said, I'll put it in the store. And the funny part is I've published UWP apps and Windows Store applications before, and literally the packaging is exactly the same. Where if you were creating a UWP app, let's say in the past, you would right click on that project and then you would say publish to store. So what they did is they said for .NET Core 3 apps and things that are published with MSIX, you create a packaging project. And that packaging project has applications that can be distributed. So you just, add a little bit of project structure to say, hey, I want to deploy this WPF app. You right click, you can associate it with your App Store ID. You can distribute the packages, create the app packages. You can install it on your own machine, test it out. And then with one click, you upload it to the Microsoft Store and it just works. It's magical, right? It's out there. And when you publish updates, you get the updates. And the funny part is that even though I did a huge blog post and you asked me to come on, it's just like developing a normal WPF app, except for now it's running on .NET Core 3. It's bundled up all special, and you get the performance. You get to light it up with some of those cool Windows 10 features, and it just works. I was pretty blown away by the whole thing. There's some implications that I just talked about it there, but at that point, I had the application, and I was in kind of that space that you just said, which was, well, I have a desktop app. What if I bring it to other desktops? And Xamarin, we support Mac OS too as part of .NET. So I literally, in one live stream, took the entire application and I ported it to Mac OS, and I shipped it to the Apple App Store for Mac OS. And now this application, which is running .NET Core 3 on Windows, is now running on the mono .NET runtime on Mac OS, but with a Mac OS user interface. But all sharing, probably I would say 85% of the code and logic is all shared between those two apps. So it's cool to take it and then put it anywhere else that you want to.
That's really cool. I like that. Because that was going to be my next question about how the process of sort of packaging it all up for MSIX and for the Windows Store actually went. But I mean, you've preempted and answered it for me. So that's brilliant. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah. And it's the funny part is once I got to that step of, okay, I want to distribute it to the store. That's the scary part. But it's really straightforward. You go into Visual Studio, add a packaging project, and it has, for all intents and purposes, the same exact look and feel, that packaging project as a UWP app. In fact, you have to have the Windows 10 UWP workload installed. So your application gets visual assets. So you get different icons. Like you actually use real proper icons that a Windows 10 app would use. You get different capabilities, declarations. So I added a protocol declaration to the application. That's all in this packaging project. So I can say, my stream timer : and then pass it a string query to launch. And that's how I have it tied in. So instead of having to parse command line arguments, I'm handling URI requests for all intents and purposes to the app. And then from there, it's all the same as UWP. You're just right-clicking, store, associating it, publishing the files, and then uploading it like normal. Like you would not even know that it's a WPF application at all because it's just a normal app in the store. And that's sort of the life we want to live, right? Just want to publish apps and get them out there easily to our users.
That's it. Like I mentioned earlier on, until the product is in the user's hands, it's not generating any use for them at the very least. The user can't get anything out of an app that doesn't exist.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's true. And then you got to, of course, once it's out there, you got to tell people about it and create a website and do all the things. And luckily, all mine is just open source on GitHub. So I just have a very simple like GitHub page that tells people how to download it and set it up and go to town on it. So yeah, I was super happy with it. And I'm sure what I'll do is, once .NET Core 3 launches again or into, release this fall, not again, but releases into, out of preview this fall, go through an upgrade process, right? And I will probably repackage it up and then get it out to the Windows 7 and Windows 8 once it's all finalized and things like that. So that'll be kind of my mission this fall, and we'll see how that goes.
One potentially mean-spirited question, since obviously, you work for Microsoft. Let's say the .NET Core 3 release, the final version, the out of preview version, the let's use it in everything, the release to manufacturer version comes out, and you go, right, I want to then move this over to, take my .NET Core 3 preview app and migrate it to .NET Core 3 proper. Do you get much of sort of inside help on that? Or is it just a case of, I will look through the public documentation and I will follow the process that, everyone else follows?
Yeah. So for me, I like to follow, I think all of us, like what we do is when we're building applications is always try to put ourselves in the shoes of the developers using our product. So like some insight would be, I go through the same steps. I use the same packages. I go through the same process that everybody else would go through. Now, if I run into issues, the difference is that I can hop on Teams and I can complain to somebody really quick, but I use that as a last resort, type of scenario. But it's important to do these things, at least from my perspective, and especially for the dev team and for the end product to do this testing early, because you sort of get to live and find gotchas with it. So for instance, I was working with Glenn Condren from the ASP.NET team, and we were working on bringing some of the ASP.NET style of dependency injection and things to Xamarin apps because they had some new packages. And, I got to use all the preview packages that were public, but there was some issues at kind of release builds, had some issues with some of the things that were missing from the Xamarin runtime. And in that instance, I actually went through the same process that you would go through. I went into Visual Studio. I said, report an issue. And then I got my issue tracked and I gave the logs. And the only difference is I then went into our Teams channel and I said, hey, I just want to let everyone know that I reported this issue and let's try to figure it out. And then have a dialogue to dive in a little bit deeper into it if I can. So, but yeah, when it upgrades to .NET Core 3, like I'll just go through the same process. I'll probably do a live stream of it and see how it goes and go from there. So yeah, I think that there's no special treatment at all really, besides that I can send someone, you can send them an email too, I guess, but I guess maybe I can hop into the Teams chat room and that maybe pushes them along a little faster. But the nice thing is that the teams, being at Microsoft, it's great to see how the teams rapidly progress and rapidly ship out products so fast. Like Visual Studio updates at a much faster cadence to get out those priority fixes. Xamarin does, the .NET Core team does. Like you get these. I love sort of the cadence in which we're releasing. It doesn't feel like too much, like often, like, you can update way too fast, but I feel like it's a good cadence in this world where we need fixes and we, need new features here and there. And I don't want to wait 5 years for a new product to come out. So it's nice to follow along and update things as they go.
Definitely. I completely agree with you on that. And I think I'll try and reinforce that sentiment of when you hit an issue, report it. Because otherwise, how are the people making these products going to know,
That's true. Yeah. It's usually the very first thing I say is people will say like, I have this issue. I'm like, report a bug. People in dev teams and PM teams, like they look at that every single day, like all of the new reports. Like it is the single-handedly best way to help out. So
like I say, I would second that in a heartbeat. I mean, you or I, if we were working on a product and we knew that someone was having trouble using it, we'd want that bug report too, regardless of whether it's .NET Core, whether it's Node, whether it's C++, we would want that report.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Just a couple of shorter questions, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Would you recommend that folks use public previews of stuff to figure out what's coming up next in their personal projects or to figure out what's coming up next in their business projects? So I have an opinion on this. I'd love to hear yours, and then maybe I can share mine. Maybe we have the same opinion. Maybe we have a different opinion.
Well, I'm definitely a fan of dog fooding preview releases for people. It's there's two factors to it, right? There's let's say I'm using just like a NuGet library. And I'm just like, oh, okay, here's a NuGet library and I'm going to, I needed bug fix. Like just, if there's a bug fix in a preview NuGet, like, just go ahead and take that in. I think that's fine. Companies, if you're at an enterprise, may have different policies against using preview software versus stable software, things like that. But I think that for the most part, in general, I'm pretty much open, especially in personal projects, to try out new stuff and give it a whirl, especially if it's just libraries. Like when you're updating to like Xamarin Forms previews, like I'm always on the preview, like nonstop, just because I'm always want to give the feedback and try, because that preview will become the stable at some point, right? So if you're able to see if it works with your project, doesn't work with your project, boom. But just create a branch. That's my best practice. Always be creating branches, and I go to town there. Basically, is what I say there. But yeah, this is a James thing. This is not a Microsoft thing. But I'm perfectly comfortable shipping preview bits to production and that's what I did with this app, right? Because I tested it. It works. Even though it's preview, to me, it's indistinguishable between it, right? Now I could create another app and maybe that's not the case, but as long as it's working, my tests are working, my unit tests are working, my UI tests are working, I'm a happy camper, and I'm getting to take advantage of the new hotness and take advantage of the things there. So that's kind of my thoughts. I don't know if that's actually answered your question at all.
That answered it perfectly. So my version of that would be, say for instance, if I'm learning .NET Core, I want to try and learn with the stable version because I'm coming to it new. So the documentation will be, I don't want to use the word better, but I guess more mature for the stable versions. But if I already know .NET Core and I want to try and build something new, I'd say quite happily use the preview builds if you're brave enough, but know that the documentation isn't there, or maybe not as mature as the stable version.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and that's just a fact of life. If someone is producing a preview build of something and releasing it at a relatively high cadence, then, us developers, we traditionally don't like to write documentation, so that's going to fall to the wayside a little bit.
Yeah.
And I said this to someone today at work. Essentially, if you are building something for the company that you work for and you are being paid to build it, maybe not use the preview version, because you may get stuck and you may have to wait for the documentation to be fixed or wait for someone else to figure out the issue. And that will be time that is affecting your maybe shipping the product. So maybe not for live products that you are being paid to build by your employer.
Yeah.
You don't want to fall into that route, and you don't want to get fired because you got stuck and no one had updated the documentation yet.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense.
So just a couple of questions about how people can find you and the kind of things that you're doing at the moment, if that's all right, James. So where can people find you online? Is it Twitter? Is it GitHub? What's the process for finding out what James is doing these days?
Yeah, I try to be everywhere all over the internet, I guess, and still not everywhere, I guess. But yeah, the best place to find me is on Twitter, definitely at James Moontemagno. That's mostly where I hang out. It's the only social media thing that I use out there. I don't really like any other platform. I love to hate Twitter, just like anything else. It's also hard to have a full conversation on Twitter, though. So I'm very open to people emailing me. It's just motz, M-O-T-Z at Microsoft.com. But that's really like those two ways are really good. Or send me a DM. My DMs are open on Twitter, and I usually have conversations back and forth there. That's how we started chatting, right? And I do read them as much as I humanly can. Same with emails. And then I have my website, which is just montemagno.com. And that's where I do all my blogging. So that's where you can find my blogs on allthings.net and Xamarin, where I'll be speaking, the podcasts I produce, the apps that I've created, things like that. But I try to blog like once a week or so or something like that, and pretty geeky topics. And they're not all Xamarin, a lot of Xamarin work, but also a lot of just crazy things that I'm sort of hacking on too. So yeah, definitely those places. And yeah, if you want more podcasts, I have plenty of podcasts that you can listen to, like Merge Conflict, and you can click on that. I'm sure I'll put stuff in the show notes, but yeah, all those places.
Definitely. So could you give us a really quick rundown of the podcasts that you create so that, listeners can pick and choose which ones, or maybe they'll go and subscribe to them all? I don't know.
Yeah, so I have, I love podcasts. I have way too many on my device, but there's 3 that I do actively. So the main development ones that I do are Merge Conflict, which is myself and Frank Kruger. It's pretty heavily on .NET and mobile, I would say, too. Not all 100% Xamarin work, but quite a lot of that, but also implications of iOS and Android. And we also talk a lot about IoT and machine learning and animations, all sorts of different things. It's super good. It's just me and Frank. We don't have guests on too often, if hardly ever, but we do that weekly every Monday. It's mergeconflict.fm. And then I do another podcast just on Xamarin with my colleague Matt Sokup. It's called the Xamarin Podcast. It's literally in the name. And that's monthly. We just do a kind of a recap of community of everything that's happening in the world of Xamarin. And then I also do a non-development podcast called Nintendo Dispatch, which is nintendodispatch.com. This is with my good buddy Michael and my other friend Christina. And every week we talk about the happenings in the world of Nintendo and the Nintendo Switch and their mobile applications and theme parks and everything. And that one is sort of gives you like a recap of all the news for the week. And we talk about games that we're playing and games that are coming out. And that one's been going strong for a while now. So yeah, there's the 3 podcasts that I do.
Fantastic. Plenty of choice for folks, depending on what their core interests are.
Yeah.
Or like I say, maybe they could subscribe to them all. I don't know.
There you go.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, all that really remains to say, James, is thank you ever so much for taking the time to chat with me today. It has been a real pleasure. I always love getting to talk, geeky and developy with someone, and it's made my Friday evening, if I'm honest.
No, awesome. Well, I'm glad I could help, and thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's always fun to talk about all the cool stuff that I get to build and share with the world, and I hope other people get to build awesome stuff too, and then get to share it with the world too. I love seeing what people are building. So
brilliant. Thank you ever so much, James.
Yep. Cheers.
That was my interview with James Moontemagno. Be sure to check out the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .netcore.show. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave me a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice, and to come back next time for more .NET Core goodness. I'll see you again real soon. See you later, folks. The .NET Core podcast is a production of RJJ Software Limited.